Okay, I want to welcome everybody to another episode of the Cornerstone of America podcast, and I am joined by Jeff Forrester, who is the founder of Active Futures. And Jeff, I like to have my guests kind of introduce themselves a little bit because it kind of gives them more of a in your own words instead of me speaking for them. So if you could tell everybody a little bit about yourself and kind of what you're doing right now.
Sure thing. So my name is Jeff Forrester, as he said, and I live in Orlando, Florida, and I'm the husband to a lovely wife, Tammy, and then have two children. Deuce is 11, and my daughter Lorelai is 9. I'm a Christian man, and I like to always lead off with that. And I'm huge in my faith and the core of what I do. And then also, as Alex had shared, I'm the founder of Active Futures, which is a passion project, which I think a lot of your listeners have passion projects. My day job is I'm a pharmaceutical rep in the oncology space. So that's what I do to pay the bills.
Interesting.
Yeah. Another really, I guess, a unique fact for me is I'm a 5th generation Floridian, which there's not very many of. So my grandmother was big on genealogy, so she traced us back to where we're considered Florida pioneers, that my family lineage was in Florida before Florida was a state.
Dude, that's amazing. So where did you guys, where did the family originate from? Like immigrated from?
Yeah, originally it's like Scotland, London. So we did the 23andMe, and so we've got there's a lot of that British Isles, Irish, Scandinavian, all that kind of area.
Oh, very cool. My mother-in-law is big into that, and she's found out some really interesting stuff, with their family, just because her first husband passed away when he was 29, and he's predominantly Irish descent, and then she remarried, and he's Swedish Scandinavian. So there's and then her herself is more Irish and a little Native American mix, obviously, after they immigrated over here. So the lineage going back, and then where they are and which royal families and stuff they're connected to. It's pretty interesting when you start going down that road.
And what was wild is my grandmother was doing it before the advent of the computer. So she would get in the car and she would drive. And this is what she and my brother really connected from that standpoint. So fortunately, when she passed away not that long ago, my brother got all of her paperwork, but it was going to different Mormon churches because they have huge genealogical, I guess is what you would say, libraries of information. She was going to city halls and old graveyards, and it was like she was a private detective, just piecing things together and looking for, well, I think they're potentially buried here, so let's go see if we can find them and get a birth date and a death date, and then she would find that and then trace it down. So she did a lot of work, and now we just spit in a little tube and then it all comes out.
That's so interesting, man. That's just crazy. Yeah, I mean, having to go through all that where you're doing it all by paper and going there. I mean, I guess there's a little bit more sense of adventure in that, right? Where you're physically going to places and you're talking to people and you're tracking down records, versus the ease of just hopping online and putting a name in it, and you just start kind of tracking things down and doing a search engine that way, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of people now, and I love technology.
Right. I mean, look what we're doing right now, right?
However, has really made us not as adventurous as we used to. Like if you wanted information, you deliberately had to go find it, and you had to dig, and it wasn't easy. I mean, I'm 47. I'm not sure how old you are, but
I'm 40.
Okay, so you're close, right? So when I had to do book reports or reports for school, it was mom put you in the car, you go to the library, you go to the index cards, and you're flipping through all the index or microfiche and all this stuff, and having to piece it all together. And now, like my kids, we just open up the laptop and Google anything, or just open my phone, and there it all is. So it's interesting, but we're also exposed to tons of stuff that we never would have been exposed to.
Yeah, you're right. You get there's definitely a pro and con and everything, right? There's a balance aspect of, to it. You get, I think that's where you have to be really kind of self-conscious or self-aware as far as what rabbit hole you're going down, as far as sitting on your phone. That's why I like that app feature where you can see how much you're on like an
Right.
application like Instagram or Facebook or something like that, and you can see like I spent how many hours today on that? Like what the, so especially
Right.
now that everybody's kind of stuck at home right now, for the most part. So you tend to do a little bit, and if you do have a business or a passion project where you work on, you do a lot of stuff from your phone. I do a lot of my promotional stuff for my podcast, from my phone itself. Once I finish recording on my laptop, everything is done through my phone. And yeah, you can start going down that rabbit hole. And I have, like you said, you have 2 kids. I have 5 kids, and I can, my kids are like, dude, get off your phone. So if they're telling me, get off your phone, I know that I've been sitting on it too long. So
Yeah. Well, I was listening to your first episode with your wife,
oh
and
yeah,
you guys were talking about that, about how she's not as apt to get on the phone and
uh-huh,
do things as you are. But and it's interesting. You have 2 sides of the fence. You have
hmm,
people that want to dig and fall into that, like Joe Rogan talks about falling into that YouTube hole where you just
oh
click on
man,
one thing, then you click on another thing, and you click on another.
right,
And that's what my kids do. I don't have the patience to do that, right? I go
right,
and I watch the video that I want to watch, and then I'm
yeah,
done.
that's great,
But then you'll find different people that'll do that, and it's interesting because all of a sudden you'll come across something that you didn't know before,
yeah,
And my kids found, my son watches this thing called Simply History on
hmm,
YouTube. It's phenomenal. This guy does extensive research, and then it's all cartoons, almost looks like South Park, but
right,
it's legit history lessons.
oh,
And
very
so,
interesting,
yeah, it's really good. And so, of course, he watches his um, excessive amounts of Minecraft and all the things that a lot of 11 year
right,
olds
yeah,
watch. And
yep,
then I'll see him watching that. I was like, what is that? And the next thing I know is I'm sitting on the floor with him, and we're learning about the Spanish flu,
uh-huh,
and
yeah.
I'm going, I had no idea. Like, we were watching one thing. I had no idea there was a land battle in Alaska in World War II.
Yeah. There's like, what's really cool is, yeah, I know you end up learning. That's one of the things I really love about like podcasting and YouTube, is you can get people that are very knowledgeable about something or have a passion about something, and then they turn it in. And if they have a little bit of creativity and some discipline and drive, you get things like Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. Have you heard of that podcast?
Yes.
Yeah, to me, I mean, like it's like a 4 hour, like audio theatrical, breakdown where it's like painting this picture of like what it was like to be living, you know, out in the plains somewhere, and then the earth starts shaking, and you see the shadow over and you realize it's like the Mongols coming, and your whole way of life is about to end. It's like, he paints this picture, and you're in your car, and you're getting goosebumps and sweaty, and
Yeah.
you're not going to get that on. And this isn't a knock on National Geographic or anything like that, because they do some amazing stuff, but you're not getting that in a 30-minute episode with 12 minutes of commercials, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, it's awesome seeing some of the stuff that people are doing right now, with the advent of the internet and podcasting and those and YouTube videos. So yeah.
Well, and that's what's cool about podcasting. And I used to
Hmm.
be a huge Howard Stern fan, and that's what a lot of people liked about his interviews, is because
Hmm.
they weren't 5 minute snippets. It
Right.
wasn't the Jimmy Fallon, the David Letterman, where you're here for 5 minutes, you make your pitch, what you're promoting, and then you're off.
Yeah.
Well,
That
here we have
formula.
these long ones. Yeah.
Hmm.
But that's what I also like, if you expand it even further and you look at what podcasters like yourself are doing, is there's no end, right? I mean, you have a time frame that you typically want to keep it in, but like some of Rogan's or Jocko's, some of their podcasts are like 4 hours long because they just
Yeah.
get on this roll and they just keep going. So it's interesting, but it's unique that all this stuff has really come to fruition in our lifetime, and you just wonder where it's going to go.
Yeah, and I think it's what I like about that, that whole concept too, especially for like guys our age, in our generation, is and there's actually been a couple articles that have been written about it, about how our generation is the one that's handling this whole, pandemic, and what's going on right now, like the best, because we've gone, like, in our lifetime, we've been through pre-internet. We had, when we were kids, phones were still attached to the wall, right? Then we went through like the cordless phone. Like, we've been through every transition, and like I remember the first Gulf War. I remember, and because I was born in '79, and so you have all these things we've kind of gone through, and this massive shift and change in culture. Like the internet hit when I was in high school. Facebook came out when I was first starting my gym, like I was 24 years old, so there's all these transitional periods, like these big like cultural shifts, and it's all happened like within our lifetime, and we've just kind of roll with it, and you adjust and you kind of move forward. And it's kind of interesting, like when everything kind of happened right now, my concern wasn't with the disease itself. My concern was more had to do with how everybody else would react. Like I knew I was fine, I knew my wife was fine, I knew my kids were going to be good. And how we handle things, how we, and we work from home for the most part. We've been homeschooling since day one. So there wasn't much of a shift in our day-to-day activities beyond how much we can go out and do. And the kids' outside activities, like at the Y or jiu-jitsu, was kind of be shut down and getting them readjusted there. But it was more of like making sure I could do as much as possible to kind of lend that hand where everybody else wouldn't freak out, right? Like you go out and about right now, people are afraid to say hi to you. They like look at you. They're like kind of doing this thing. So I go out of my way to smile, say hi to people, and kind of be engaging, especially because I'm not, you're tattooed. I have tattoos, and it's not really a stigma anymore, but it's, it still is from time to time, especially when, for certain generations. And, I'm 6'1", 260, and tattooed. And so I make sure I smile and wave and, so yeah.
Well, I'm the same because I have deep set eyes. So
yeah.
I'm out, I naturally kind of look mean all the time.
And if you have a mask on, now you're sketchy.
Oh, well, see, fortunately, right now in the county I live in, we don't have to wear a mask, so
yeah,
I
don't do it either. Yeah.
And so, but it's amazing, kind of the thing that happened. And I was telling my wife I had to run to the grocery store today, and you have these people that think that because there's a pandemic that there aren't any rules anymore. They're like driving the wrong way in the parking lot, and they're just kind of making it up as they go and going, wait, no, you're just supposed to cover your face and stay 6 feet apart. There's still the rules of the road still exist.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see how people react, or I guess the better phrase would be take advantage of a situation,
Right. Well, I mean, and then like you mentioned before we started recording about, living in Florida and, being in, obviously that's a highly active like hurricane area, right? You would think, somebody who was born and raised there and having gone through, a few times, so like when you go through those kinds of, things in emergency situations, and natural disasters, there's a routine that you go through, and community kind of gets together. You guys talk about things. You guys have what's going on, but you realize, and this was my concern about this whole thing. So when Superstorm Sandy hit, right? What was that, like 2005, 15, 14? When was that?
It all starts to become a blur, but
I know, right?
Yeah.
So
I think it was like 5 years ago.
Right. So that pummeled the East Coast, but I mean, it wrecked like New Jersey and that whole area, like really, really bad, right? I mean, like just took out Coney Island. And day 3, and I mentioned this in my last couple episodes too, day 3 of no power and running water. So day 3, like they're shooting each other at gas stations, right? Day 3. I'm like, that's a camping trip. You know what I mean? 3 day,
Yeah.
So, but it's that like the anxiety and the fear and the hoarding mentality, you know what I mean? It's just like, it's insane. So that was my concern, more than anything else, kind of getting back to what we were talking about when everything kind of started happening, was making sure I didn't have to be, or my wife and I didn't have to be out and about when people were starting to kind of freak out a little bit. And, fortunately and pleasantly surprised, there hasn't been that much of it, especially here. Everybody's been, for the most part, really good. So, so I am proud of the human race so far.
Yeah, and likewise here, you
Yeah.
see a greater sense of compassion. I think you see. I know I've seen a greater sense of, I guess, neighborhood. I don't know, not really a word, but you see more people out, more people waving back. There's still that one when I'm out on a run. I've made it a point to actively not just kind of give the head nod and a wave, but say good morning, and that freaks some people out, right? Because they're not used to being talked to. They're like, wait, I don't know you. Why are you telling me good morning?
Right.
And I'm part of a mastermind, and we were talking the other day, and this guy had a really good suggestion: is when you go out to the supermarket, you go to pick up your takeout, whatever you may be going to do, is look at the person in the eye and tell them thank you for being there today.
Yeah.
Because that's what we don't get during hurricane seasons, right? Because everything's closed because there's no power. And
right. Everything's shut down.
People start to panic. But these people, whether you want to agree that they're risking their lives or not, I mean, they're still out there, right? And they're still in a highly contagious, putting themselves in a highly contagious situation. And just so I can buy food for my family. And that's huge. That's huge. And I think that's where, we as a human race, like you said, you were pleasantly surprised. It's been a nice breath of fresh air
Right.
to see people go back to, I feel like it's almost like back to when we grew up,
Hmm.
because things weren't as fast in the late 70s and the early 80s. It was starting to pick up speed, but it hadn't gotten to the Mach 2 that it has been the last decade, really, is when it just has just gone full throttle. So it's been neat to see the people really react differently to each other than what I expected as well.
Right. So, speaking of, we grew up, like one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on was to talk about, you had kind of a unique upbringing. So, talk a little bit about that, as far as, you're, like you said, you told me your family's what, fifth generation Floridian, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So, but your grandparents, I believe, started was it or great grandfather car dealership?
Yep. So my great granddad, he started a car
Hmm.
dealership. So we're all originally from North Florida. So
Hmm.
Gainesville, Florida, High Springs, which
Right.
is 2 hours from the Georgia line. And he started a Chevrolet dealership and
Hmm.
started in 1926, and it still's running to this day.
That's awesome.
Now it's not a Chevrolet because when they went through that whole um, automobile crash, they started taking away a lot of the smaller um,
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
franchises. They were just pulling everything back and making the big ones. So they took it away from our family, but my family still has the sales and service. And so my great granddad had it, and then my granddad had it, and now my uncle and my mom run it now, which is really cool to say that they've been able to continue on and they're still doing well because they're considered an essential now. But at the time, my dad was he was more of the rebel of the group, and like as soon as he was old enough to get out, he left.
Yeah.
And so he was kind of one of those guys that we probably a lot of us know and maybe are. I wasn't, but he was constantly searching for something. He didn't go to school. He trained to be an ambulance driver. So
Hmm.
back in the 60s, you were an ambulance slash hearse driver in the small towns, right? So you
Oh, interesting.
one thing was for both, right? So I think you wanted to be in it when the lights were on, and you didn't want to be on it when the lights were off.
Yeah, obviously, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, and then if you're driving back then too, like you weren't really like an EMT.
no,
You were just like transport service, right? Yeah.
yep. You just
Yep.
picked him up, put him in the
Hmm.
back, and you went. So he
Yep.
did that. He went to school to start being a forest ranger. I mean, just a lot of stuff, and then he ended up in the
Very cool.
military and was in the army. And he was stationed. That's him over my shoulder. I got to get the camera angle right there.
Oh, very
So
cool.
he was in the army for 4 years and was stationed in Alaska. He loved it. So this was back in the 60s.
I love
Uh,
Alaska.
and I've never been. And he always wanted to go back. And he used to tell us stories. He worked a teletype machine. So he was like in the special services. So they were intercepting things from Russia on
Hmm.
teletype machines.
Oh man.
But he would talk about hunting trips and just loading up, and him and a buddy, they would just drive and just go camp and hunt, and it just sounded unbelievable. And so he was getting ready to get discharged, and they tried to get him to sign back up. This was mid 60s, so
Right.
they knew that they were ramping up for Vietnam and wanted to keep people in. And he's like, well, can you guarantee that I'll stay in Alaska? And they were like, no. He's like, all right,
I'm
later.
out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Alaska's
Like, I
just.
don't want to be stuck in Vietnam, or I don't want to be stuck other than Alaska. So
Oh, right. Yeah,
fortunately
definitely.
for me, he came home. Yeah, he came home for me, and my brother. So he met my
Hmm.
mom in High Springs, and then started to work at Bell South. And so I think he still had that entrepreneurial bug where he just couldn't get. He wasn't a 9 to 5 kind of guy, which is funny because he ended up being a 9 to 5 guy, but owning his own business.
Yeah.
And I think from what I can tell is he wasn't super talkative, which that generation really wasn't. They weren't a lot of
Right.
them weren't open to sharing why they did the things that they were doing and what motivated them.
Yeah.
He
My
just
dad was
worked
the
hard.
same way. Yeah.
Yeah, just you get up and you go to work, and that's it. Um, and so before my brother was born, he ended up doing some side work over the holidays at a toy store, and it was called Toyland. And the guy that owned it was Mr. Jolly. That was his real name. And so this was back in the late 60s. And so he worked there for a little bit. And
Right.
then Mr. Jolly was looking to get out of it. So he asked my dad, he's like, well, do you want to buy the toy store? And my dad's like, well, sure, but I don't have any money. I I run telephone lines, so I don't have money to buy a store. He's like, well, how much money you got in your pocket? And I think he had a couple of dollars. He's like, okay, there's your down payment. Now we can work out the rest. So my dad bought it
Oh, that's crazy.
back in, I think it was 68 or 69. My brother was born in 69. And so he ran it, and it thrived. It was only one of two toy stores. And this was before all big business and chains had kicked in. And so he was real smart, big on customer service, cleanliness, tidiness, keeping everything in order. And so from that, he started and developed well. And I don't want to get bogged down in all the specific details, but he was running his own business and it was
Right.
doing really well. And then the big box stores started coming in, the Kmart's, the Walmart's, the Toys R
Mm-hmm.
Us, and started to put squeeze on the toy industry because they were buying things by the semi load and he was having to buy things much, much smaller quantities.
Sure.
So he transitioned over to hobbies. We did that. And then in 1990, my senior year in high school, he had been battling what we thought was pneumonia for a long time. And finally, it just got so bad, my mom put her foot down. She's like, we're going to get it checked out. And so
Mm-hmm.
the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, he had a needle biopsy and they determined that he had stage 4 lung cancer. And then as they continued to go through that, they figured it was both lungs, brain. Those were the main places that they could see because he was having some dizziness and just some different things that created them to want to scan his head. So that was the Wednesday before Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
And this is my senior year. And so Thanksgiving Day, he's in the hospital and they said, well, we got to admit you like now. We've got to start chemotherapy because they knew it was inoperable. They knew that his time was short, but they thought they could at least get him some additional time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when I started to work. So because he was the only income in our family. My mom didn't work; she raised us and then helped him. And so I fortunately went to a small Christian school at the time, and so they allowed me to go to school in the morning and then leave there to go open the store. And we didn't know how long this would last at
Right.
first. And
And you were
so
a senior? You were a
I
senior
was
in
a
high school
senior
at
in
the
high
time?
school.
So what are you,
Yeah,
16, 17 years old, something like that at the time?
17. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
damn, what
And
a burden to take on at that age, man.
yeah, and it was funny at the time. Like I didn't even think twice about it. I just did it. And my family, and I think most families, we have a tendency to if we stay busy, we don't have to face the things that we don't want to face. And
Right.
so by being busy, I didn't have to face that my dad was terminally ill and was going to
Mm-hmm.
die. So I worked, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it and enjoyed it. But I'd also in the back of my mind, you know, I saw him growing frustrated with owning his own business, had no savings, had really not very good health insurance, um, no life insurance to speak of, was tethered to the business, couldn't take a vacation, was just stressed out. So that was my vision of owning your own business, was stress and just shackled to it.
Right.
And so my mom and he passed away 8 months after diagnosis. So he passed
Oh, man.
away a month after I graduated high school.
God,
And
that's
that's where
fast.
it very fast. Well, he had 3 rounds of chemo and then they finally had to stop because
Yeah.
it was just ripping his body to pieces. And he went from, I don't know exactly how much he weighed, but he was 5'10", probably a little bit over 200 pounds or right around 200 pounds. And when he finally passed, I mean, he looked like he was a prisoner of war. I mean, he was just a shell of a body, but he was committed. I mean, he said that he wanted to live until I graduated high school,
Mm-hmm.
and he did. I mean, he was able to see me graduate high school, and then almost to the day, a month later, he passes away.
Right.
And so from that, he passed away, and then my mom, she came right to work, and she was working. That's what's amazing is she was still working through this. She was taking care of him, but
Mm-hmm.
then still helping me with the books. I'm 17. I don't know how to do books. I don't know how to do payroll. And, I could unlock the door and I could tell people
Right.
how to control cars and planes and trains and all that fun
Uh-huh.
stuff. But
Use
that
the
was
cash
new.
register. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I knew how to use that. So we ran it for the next 7 years.
Oh,
And
wow.
it was stressful for her, stressful for me, zapped a lot of savings because, again, as things were rolling, she and I both were naive enough to where we didn't know how to pivot with
Mhm.
where everything was going. Because what was happening is that in the hobby business, like most of these, the people we were buying from were selling direct via catalogs.
Right.
So somebody would come into our store, look at the item, but then go online, not go online, but then go into the catalog, call the
Mhm.
800 number, and buy it for
Order it.
$35 cheaper,
Right. 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 Right.
So it was challenging. And so I worked my way all through school. And then once I finished, then we just made the decision that we just needed to close. And it was
Mhm.
the Rich Dad Poor Dad syndrome. I don't know if you've
Sure.
ever read that book.
Parts of it,
So,
yeah.
so the concept is get a good job that pays, you get your vacation, and then you have retirement, right?
Yeah.
That was the mecca for me. It's like I want to work for somebody else, and I don't have to worry about all this.
Well, especially after going through 7 years of of your early, like, technically you weren't even an adult, but your late teens, early adulthood, where you're taking on all this responsibility, and there's that period where you're just like, you know what, I don't want to deal with payroll, I don't want to deal with paying bills, and this whole umbrella of like owning a business. It's nice just to kind of step back and have this one thing I'm responsible for, and this company will get my benefits and salary and everything else too. And then when I go home, I'm home. I don't have to think about anything else and don't deal with that too, right? So you think about it that way. I mean, I remember going through that after we left the gym, and I went and that's when my wife said to me, she was like, "Can you just go get a job, in the corporate world for a couple of years, take a break from running a business, and let everybody else worry about like all the other aspects of it too." And I was 37 at the time, and I was like, "Yeah, I could do that." And it sounds good, right? But then all the other things come into play too, which is like what you don't have control over, and how much time you end up wasting in useless meetings, and report these useless reports that and I guess it depends on different companies and their size they are, and what their setup is. But yeah, I totally get where you're going with that.
Yeah. Well, and then the other problem that I left out is I grew up a fat kid, and not that I was a fat kid because I had a quitter's mentality. So if
Hmm.
anything got tough, I just went with whatever's easy.
Right.
And in the 70s, we didn't know everything we know about nutrition, right? It
Sure.
was just here's the food, eat it. And
Yep.
so I still am. I can't say I was. I'm an emotional eater.
Hmm.
If I'm stressed, I like to eat. If I'm happy, I like to eat. If I'm sad, I like to eat. I
Right.
just like to eat.
Yeah.
And I made bad food choices, but the ultimate thing is because of the weight, I created for myself a really poor self image,
Right.
and I had that fixed mindset where I didn't want anything difficult. I wanted something easy.
Hmm.
And I look back now and I see that popped up from the business, right? It was just we'll just run away from it, go to what's easy. And
Hmm.
again, not that it's wrong, it was just easy. Um, and I see that now, which is fine, right? I mean, as long as we learn and we pivot and we move and change, that's where we're at. So that's really what got me started. And looking back, is that was the foundation of who I became as a professional. And
Hmm.
I'm seeing it shaped me as a dad today. And to
Hmm.
me, for the longest time, because I saw my dad work from morning until night every single day. Like he would leave, he slept late. We would already be in school by the time he woke up because he didn't have to open the store till 9. But then he kept it open until 9. So when I was younger, I was already in bed.
Right.
So it was that, and I didn't have a relationship with my dad. I remember one time he, I because of my weight, I hated going to water parks for school outings and stuff. And so they were
Oh,
going to
gotcha.
the water park, and I'm like, I'm not going. I'm not taking my shirt off. This is crazy. Kids are mean. So kids are mean, and I didn't like the way I looked, but I didn't want to do anything about it. Right. So
Right.
that's a whole nother episode. So he decided. My mom convinced him to take off work and take me fishing, and I was on cloud nine. And I just remember when we went fishing, and I was just so excited to be there. But the whole time that I was there, I'm sitting there going, I don't really know this guy. And
Oh,
it was
interesting. Yeah,
it was
like you were
weird.
aware of
Like,
that.
yeah, like he was my hero, and he
Hmm.
still is, and I love him dearly. but the whole time I was there, it was just an awkward feeling because I'd never had consistent interaction with my dad.
Hmm.
Um, but he was loving, if that makes sense, right? I mean, I knew that he loved me and supported me, and he provided, some things for me, but there was a deficiency in his ability to know how to do that because his dad didn't do that. So
Right.
it was the epigenetics of just perpetuating the same cycle over and over.
Well, and if you think about like your dad's generation too, like you said, your dad was what he was born in what, 40s?
42. Yeah,
Yeah,
40.
42. Okay, so yeah, so he's the child of like that greatest generation, right? That went to World War, dealt with World War II and whatnot. And so you think about the goal there, and that's kind of where that came out of. Like, the American dream was house, wife, couple children, the white picket fence, a job that you can like stability. Because if you think about from like, I mean, even if you go back, but let's just put a number on it. Let's say like 1900 to like 1950, 60, right after World War II, it was like, war, like it's just like one thing after another. And you had the Great Depression, and then you had, like all these like massive cultural shifts like constantly going on, right? So the concept of like stability in the world where you had a job for 25, 30 years, you retired, you got a pension, you had a house, you had like that was the American dream, right? Where as we grow and we evolve now, it's that's it's not saying it's a bad thing, but it's almost like we've improved so much to society, no matter what anybody wants to say, right? That it's not just about going to a job that you marginally like or even borderline hate for 25, 30 years just because it's good. It's like, well, what the hell's the point of living? Like, are you contributing something to society, to something greater? Do you have a sense of fulfillment? Do you feel like you're giving back, or are you just another cog in a machine, right? And I think that's where the difference is, and that's where it lies too as well. So, and yeah, having that also that like inability sometimes to even convey that feeling, like on some level, I've had a deeper conversation with you than I've ever had with my own father, right? Because it just wasn't there, no matter how much you tried to, pursue it
Right.
sometimes from that generation. I mean, and my dad immigrated from the Middle East. So, there, there was, kids are, hey, if you stand over there and look at it, just shut up, I'll let you know when I want to talk to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
it's wild. And so for me, it was funny because um, I started to realize, because I remember before I had kids, I always said to myself, is I will not do that, right? Like I'll
right.
always be present for my kids and I'll do those things. But then over time, we all get sucked into work, we get sucked into our life. And one of the
Hmm.
things that again for me that I mentioned earlier is if I'm busy, I don't have to face the demons that I have in my head. I don't have to
Right.
face the things that come. So I created just being busy all the time to avoid, um, you know, overcoming things that I knew I needed to overcome. And so what happened was is that busyness created a decade of not being here. I was
Hmm.
here. I was physically in my house. I was providing for my kids more than my parents had ever been able to provide, um, financially, right? So,
Right. Yeah. You're
tons
financially
of love.
successful.
I never needed anything as a child. I always had clean clothes, ate well. We talked about that.
Yep.
Never missed a meal.
Yep.
Um, but what was occurring was by being busy and chasing titles and chasing all these different things and trying to make other people, um, fill me up. I was avoiding the people that needed me the most, and that was my wife and my kids, my friends, and those type things. And so, through that busyness created, depression,
Hmm.
anxiety, bad choices, lots of bad choices, and from that, it was amazing that you start to, the thing that you don't want to be the most is what you end up becoming.
Right.
And so even though I was here, it was no different than my dad working from 9 to 9 and my kids, me not seeing him. My kids were here and we interacted. I went to their games, but my brain was stuck to my phone, thinking about what emails coming in. What do I need to do for this? How do I need to shift these people over here? And what do I need to do that? And it was just one of those things that was just, it was very unhealthy. And so, from that, again, as long as you can learn from your mistakes and forgive yourself, then everything can be better, right? Because we all make mistakes. the name of your show is Cornerstone of America. And I don't know if you've ever watched How America Was Made on the History Channel.
Yeah, a few episodes. Yeah.
Really good, right?
Hmm.
Rockefeller and Carnegie and those guys, and they weren't without their faults, right? I mean, they
Hmm.
built America and they built everything up, and they had a lot of positive things about them, and but they had a lot of negatives and a lot of things that you can't go through history and never look at anybody that doesn't have a flaw or something that they wish they hadn't have done. But it's the people that end up shifting and saying, "Look, that's behind me,
Right.
and now I need to move forward and become a better person, more stable person, and be the person that my family needs, that my friends need, that the community and the world needs." Honestly,
Yeah, no, most definitely. It's if I think like one of the hardest things sometimes is you measure success by these kind of markers that you think is supposed to be success, right? Whether it's having your own business and being financially independent and whatnot, and those things are all great. But if like and that's kind of where I got the name of this the show. Like, but if your foundation is in there of where as an individual, as a man, as a father, uh, if you don't have this bedrock of a foundation of what you like, moral compass is, what you will and you will not do, right? And if everything's kind of fluid at times, or you have this mentality of, um, I guess the best way to put it is like justify, like the means justify the ends, right? Then
mm-hmm.
what ends up happening is before you realize it, you've compromised so much of whether it's your time, whether it's like you said, you create busyness just to be busy, so you don't actually confront your own, faults and your own demons. That you're without knowing it, you're actually setting yourself up for failure,
Oh, big time.
and you're setting yourself up for And I went through that about probably about 2 to 3 times, like big. I can actually pinpoint like days, in my life with my wife and kids over the last, like 6, 7 years, where it was like on this day in this year, this is when the shit hit the fan. On this day in this year, this is when this came crashing down. On this, and they're different events, but they all stemmed from the same thing, which was me not recognizing those issues that I wasn't confronting. Me not realizing that no, you can't be fluid with everything. You have to be able to say no. You can't justify everything. You can't do everything. You can't just put your head down and say I'll figure it out. That's great, but there still needs to be some framework to it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
So.
and I feel also the other thing, and it's that vulnerability that we avoid as
Mhm.
men,
Yeah.
and really as people, right? Humans don't want to be vulnerable because
Right.
we just we know how other people are, and it's blood in the water, and here come the sharks if you're vulnerable.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
What I've learned though is if you can surround your people that are safe, that you can call your tribe, your accountability buddies, whatever kind of term you want, it really gives you power, because then you can release that thing that other people look and they nod and they're like, yeah, I've had that same thing. So I'm like, okay, because I know growing up and up until most of my adulthood, I thought it was weird. I thought these thoughts that I had in my head and these different feelings that I may have had were just unique to me. And then when you sit down and you start talking to people and they're going, yeah, I've been battling with the same thing. I had the same reaction once that happened. But this is what I ended up doing, which, led to this. And, you create all these different things. And so, when you talked about the foundation, to me, that's a huge part of it. And for me, like I said earlier, my faith is a massive part of that foundation that just gives you something to level set, to say, all right, I know that there's something bigger out there. I know that there's something that's watching over me and gives me strength and power. And
Mhm.
from that, I can overcome anything. Right. And then my wife, I mean, there's just no way. I mean, it's that thing that to having a partner that's there, that it under no circumstances that if the house is on fire, she's coming in and saving
Right.
me if I'm still asleep. And
Mhm.
as I remember, there was an instance where I just kept all this stuff bottled up, and finally I let it all out, and she looked at me and she said, I'm still here, I
Mhm.
didn't go anywhere. And it changed my entire life when she said that. I was like,
Right.
okay, all right, so I can share this and not feel like a weirdo, or feel like that she's judging me or putting me down and those type things. And so that I know we've completely gone off probably track of what you wanted to talk about,
No, man, it's cool.
but I think that's, when you talked about cornerstone and foundation, all that stuff
Right.
just popped up. That is just huge, you know?
So talking about that actually, so what was for you? What was the shift? Whether it was like something specific or just kind of this gradual change, where you did, because I recognize that too. I would always pursue the path of least resistance at times versus going to pursue hardship, even though I was active and I did a lot of things through high school and after that, and I didn't like being idle, but the things I would be busy with were things that I was more naturally inclined to enjoy rather than actually pursuing hardship, right? Or
Yeah.
pursuing something that was more difficult that would grant me more long-term success. So for you, what was that shift?
So where the shift started is that I just had a big, personal event that had occurred, and then I just dove into self development, just big
Hmm.
time. I've always been big into self development and trying to better myself and better my skills as a leader, as a salesperson, whatever it may be. Even though I didn't like things easy, I still am relatively intelligent to where I could pick up a book. And part of, I guess, my gift is I can be very intentional about things. So if I
Right.
read something, I'm going to put it to use. So, which was really good. So I developed myself as a good leader. So along those lines is when I had this personal event that occurred. I decided, I was like, I've got to change. I've got to work on myself. And where it happened is a buddy had recommended the book "Living with the Seal" by Jesse Itzler.
Yeah.
It's a really good book. So I
Yep.
read that book and I just flew through it. I thought it was a fantastic book. And so then it set me on the journey to figure out, okay, who is the seal? Because they talked about him, but they never really gave his name until the very end. So then
Yeah.
as they gave his name, I Googled it. And so I started finding him on podcasts, good old David Goggins. And then his book came out in December
Uh-huh.
of 18? No,
Yep.
19. 18.
Yeah.
18.
David Goggins. Yeah, it was. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And that really set me on the path. And so he would have been a guy that I ran away from in
yeah. Hmm.
college, like, or high school, anytime. The way he spoke and just his intensity, I would have run as far as I could away from him. Like, guys like that used to scare me.
Yeah.
But there was something that resonated with what he said, what happened to his life, right? I mean, I thought I might have had a bad childhood until you read his book.
Right.
But I listened to his book on Audible, and it was fantastic if you haven't listened to it on Audible. And he gives you tools to use. And so that accountability mirror that he talked about really, really put me on the path of finding things that were difficult. And then it was taking all those post-it notes and putting them around my mirror, and then slowly saying, okay, I'm going to work on this, and then taking them down when I did it.
Hmm.
And just the feeling of accomplishment with taking little things down created that, where I'd been a runner before, but just focusing on the pain side of it. And
Hmm.
then also knowing that I could control my thoughts and my brain. And so he's a good follow on Instagram. And you have to, if you're not into language, you just have to ignore it. Or I think you love hate David Goggins.
He's an intense guy, man. That guy is
Yeah.
intense. It's yeah, just his whole uh the one of the things I love about one of the messages that he gives out is really that you you stop because because you're mentally weak, not because you're physically weak. You are physically, no matter where you were in your physical journey, whether you're picking up a dumbbell for the first time, whether you're learning how to do a push-up, or whether you're like me, or or where you've played sports and you've worked off and on, and myself with training. It's, you always stop because you mentally decide to stop versus how much you can physically do. You can physically do more. And the way he kind of puts it, it's almost undeniable.
Yeah.
And he proves it. I mean, he proves it. I mean, it's he's showing it.
Yeah. He has one that really resonated with me. Is like, hey, brain, I win again.
I
He
like
uses
that, man.
different language, but
Right.
it resonated completely with me. And so that's been somewhat of a mantra that I used for a while. And then
Hmm.
the more I started thinking about it, I started building my confidence. And some of it was through, study of the Bible and just really getting centered there, and finding your
Right.
center, getting my my priorities right. I wrote a personal creed that I look at every day that just really helps me, like you said, keeps me centered on the values that I know that will move me forward in life, that on my deathbed, I'll be happy with what they say about me, right?
Hmm.
Because I'm 47 and I feel like I'm hopefully only halfway done. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
I'm hopeful that I've got another 47 in front of me that makes it great, right? And so some people are like, oh, you're 47, and like our parents probably thought 47, you're almost dead, at that point.
Dude, that's
And
such a joke, especially now, like what we
yeah,
understand and where kind of like science is going and the understanding of the human body and what we're capable of and how much control we have over our own biology and nutrition and training and what. Like I'm 40 and I feel like I'm just getting started. Like I'm just figuring things out. Like at 40,
I agree.
So
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, all this gray is not it's it's earned,
yeah, that's
but
earned, man.
it's one of those things where now looking at I want things easy, right? I want things
Right,
difficult. And when you look at things and you go through your life, the only time you ever move forward is when you go through something difficult.
right. Like what
Whether
comes out on the other side, right?
right. It's
Yeah.
like when you train, those days that you train and you're
Mhm.
just whipped, you just grew.
Yeah. Do you ever see? Do you ever follow Tim Kennedy?
Yes.
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes from him is "All good things in life are on the other side of hard work."
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
and
true.
yeah, it is. And I mean, I find myself now where, especially kind of with everything that's kind of going on now, and the expectations of society aren't, you know, pressing on everybody else and everything that's going on to where it is acceptable to like everybody wants you to chill and kind of slow down and stay home and not be doing a bunch of stuff to an extent. And part of that is good because I think it's good for everybody to see just to kind of like, to kind of reprioritize in what's going on. But at the same time, too, I think that could also be a trap because you can fall into this false sense of just like stagnation, right? And not being productive and pursuing things that are difficult. And I think that's why it's so important now with what's going on. If you don't have something where I mean, if you're one of the select few that you're working from home, you still have a job, you have a career, everything that's going on, but you realize even from working from home, you have more time than you would if you're going into an office or a physical place every single day because you're not jumping in the car, you're not out there for however many hours it is. The workday obviously is there's only so much you could do online, right? And you have so much more time now available, and it shouldn't be just sit around and do nothing, right? Like it's a great opportunity now to pick up those side hustles, to work on those passion projects, to pick up a new skill, learn a new skill. Because I mean, you can always learn a new skill, right? And the great thing, again, one of the great things about the internet is you can learn just about anything. There's a YouTube video for everything,
There's no
and
excuse anymore.
right, no, there's not, and it's so it's been fun, for myself, kind of picking up woodworking and learning how to build stuff, and be doing that. So, yeah, man, it's been fun. So, tell me about Active Future. So, you read that book and you started making that change. What was the shift for you to kind of start that project? Tell me about that.
Yeah. So Active Futures has come from just a love of helping other people and wanting to add value. I was in leadership roles, excuse me, for about 10 years. And just I'm good at it. I'm by nature, I'm an encourager. I like to see other people excel and do well. And so from that, I talked to some people and would share some things like you really should try to help people on the side.
Hmm.
You should try to do things because my current full-time job is I'm like I said before, I'm a pharmaceutical rep and I work, but in the evenings I have time to be able to help people. And so I sat down one day because some people were talking to me. And again, the beauty of your cell phone is I just started on my notes app, just started typing things that I had learned and seen people benefit from in my years in leadership. And so started putting it down, refined it, and ended up coming up and developing 4 modules. And it's not a formula per se, but it was a way for me to just to give back, and
Right.
where at first it was something that you see all these things over Instagram, the Grant Cardones and the
Hmm.
Brandon Bouchards, all these guys that are super wealthy coaches and all these things. And I'd be lying if I didn't say that's a dream that would be fun to do.
Right.
But through a lot of reflection and really trying to see what I needed to do, is that God's blessed me with a wonderful career now.
Hmm.
And so I can look at it as just adding value. Like, I just want to add value to other people. And it doesn't matter to me at this point if I can make any money. I feel that if I can, again, if I'm looking at the creed that I want to do to add value to other people, I can create an opportunity. And that's really where Active Futures came out of was that idea of, what can I do to help other people to get things out there? Because I wasn't on social media up
Right.
until a year ago.
Oh,
And
okay.
what's been amazing through that is just making connections with people like yourself and all these other people has been unbelievable for me, because then it's given me an opportunity to share my story, and other people hear and like, oh, I know that's exactly how I feel. And when you were talking, that was something that resonated with me. And so with Active Futures, if I can just offer people an opportunity to look through some things, because it costs me nothing to type out 4 modules on a PDF. It
Sure.
costs $1.
Yeah.
And if I can help people by sending that to them, what's interesting though is it comes down to being intentional on doing
Hmm.
anything with it.
Yeah.
And that's the difference, right? So when you get something and you learn something with books or whatever it may be, is you have to intentionally try to apply it. And using yours and your wife's training
Hmm.
and company as an example, you can show people the exercise, but that person has to do the exercise if they want to grow, if they
Right.
want to gain the strength and improve. And that's what's different. It's interesting that so many people are willing to put the work in to improve their physique, their strength, and the outward things. But very few people, I'm finding, are willing to put the work in to change and develop themselves professionally. They just kind of wing it. They're like, hey, if I get better, I get better. And I'll listen to a podcast or do something. And oh, that was really good. But then they just they don't try to change and move forward. And that's really what Active Futures and the modules are all about. Is I look at 4 different areas that I feel like, regardless of your social status, of your professional status, one is knowing your strengths and weaknesses,
Hmm.
and just really being honest with your strengths, and then being honest with your weaknesses, and then using your strengths to leverage to develop your weaknesses. The second one is improved communication. The third is self development, and that it involves not only developing yourself, but finding mentors, coaches, a tribe to help you out. And then the last one is just setting a proper course. And what I'm hopeful for is it's a series of questions, because it's not a formula, right? Whatever works for me, not necessarily going to work for you. And so a lot of people that I've found, if you try to use a formula, it just puts people in a box that they don't want to be in, because it gives them an excuse and say, well, that's just
Right.
not what I think.
Hmm.
It's like, well, self-development, what are you going to do? If you just
Hmm.
look at those 4 things, you can do anything you want to for self-development, but you just need to self-develop. I mean, that's just not anything that's going to work if you just don't put in the work yourself.
Yeah, I mean, that's well said, man. And that's really hit the nail on the head with regards to the work that people will do physically, but like mentally and emotionally, it tends to kind of fall by the wayside. I mean, I know that was a big part of one of the things that I always put on the back burner, because I could just like power through it or plow through it, or just by sheer will or stubbornness, I'll figure it out or I'll get the work done. But again, you go back to that thing where what you're really doing is you're just setting yourself up for failure, to where those things are constant. I mean, it's almost like you have a cracked foundation in the house, and instead of like fixing that foundation to make sure it's like rock solid, you're just like, oh, I'll just cover it up with some spackle. Like, that'll
Right.
hold it together. We'll slap some duct tape on it.
Yeah.
And yeah, and the reality is like all you're doing is prolonging the inevitable. And what's great is, for at least for myself, when I went into the corporate world and I had to leave the like running my own business and being something where I did control everything, and I thought I controlled everything, but I was in an environment where I didn't. There was a lot of things that were presented to me that I noticed were, number one, I was really forced to work on some of my flaws, the things that I put off on the back burner, like working on details and paperwork. But the other aspect of it too was it emphasized the importance of actually being intentional with things, right? About actually actively pursuing things, whether it was, and that's where I really kind of saw the mental health aspect, and that awareness of, like, working on yourself, because you saw so many people that were defeated in this corporate environment that had this job because they thought like that's where they should be because it pays $60,000 or $70,000 a year and it gave them benefits, so they should be grateful for that. Kind of like what we talked about earlier, like that was the norm then, right? And then they didn't. It's like, well, they get no pat, they get no joy out of what they do. They borderline hate their job. They hate waking up in the morning. They're not happy with their lives, and of course, when you're mentally, if you feel like crap mentally and emotionally, that starts to manifest itself physically. Obviously, you're not motivated to work out and eat right, so you emotionally eat, and you get to know these individuals, and you find out that they have all these other things that they're passionate about, but they don't know how to get out of their own way and move forward with pursuing that project. And it's like, well, I can't do that. Well, why can't I do that? And when you really start drilling down and ask them questions, there's no real answer besides either a fear of change or not knowing how to start. And it's interesting, and it's fun to actually see like a spark happen with somebody that you talk to, and you see them start to pursue something. But at the same time, it's kind of sad too, where you realize like there's so many people that are missing that ability to kind of self-govern and work on their own mental, like, well-being and their mental health.
Yeah, and that's what I'm learning.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that I heard this where a lot of people will say, well, this is what I've learned. And if you say learned, that means you've figured it out.
Right.
And I love the shift of what I'm learning is. And so every day is a learning opportunity for
Right.
me. No one day is the same as the next. And it's utilizing the things that you talked about that just continue to help. And that was one of my questions for you is like, why did you want to start this podcast? Because you probably knew it wasn't going to be easy.
Yeah, that's a good question. The reason why I wanted to start it was, well, I wanted to do a podcast for quite some time. So, a couple things. One was when I figured out the concept of, um, you know, getting better at something and, pursuing like a hardship or difficulty, through, obviously one of them was working out, because I was also like a chubby kid after I stopped playing football. And I, my own insecurities were having a little bit of a speech impediment, not being a what I consider like a really good public speaker. I wasn't well read. I could outwork anybody. I was one of those like high school and college athletes, where I was good because I outworked you, not because I just had natural ability, right? And so the podcast came from when we had the gym. I wanted to get a podcast going. I was using social media to grow the gym, but I was struggling with starting it because I didn't want to start another podcast about fitness. And not that there's anything wrong with it. I just felt like, for myself at least, I would kind of get bored talking about training to a certain period of time. And then also for myself, I knew that I love the podcasts I'm interested in. I listen to the most are conversation format podcasts, not just listening to one person speak, but kind of like what we're doing, right? Whether it's a Joe Rogan or a Tim Ferriss or a Jocko podcast or, any one of those types. They're really interesting to me. And it's also like, people interest me and stories interest me. So, and then when we went through, the 2 or 3 times where we just had these like big traumatic life events because of decisions I made and, and self-destructive behavior that I had in my own life, I realized, okay, I think I found what I want to do, which was I want to have this podcast. I want to talk to people and I want to get to know their stories and their backgrounds also, and also being a kid of, both my parents immigrated from the Middle East, and, I was born and raised here. But my mom, my dad, I have a lot of extended family that are still back in the Middle East, and just understanding like how grateful I am. Like I won the lottery by being born here, so I'm so grateful of all the opportunities. And no matter what's happened, no matter how many times I've crashed and burned in my life, there was never a time where I thought like, this is like, I'm screwed. My life's over. There's nothing like, you can do whatever the hell you want in this country. You just have to be willing to be able to put the effort and the ability to do it. So the podcast for me was this ability to kind of to self better myself, to be able to like, do you listen to Order a Man, Ryan Mickler's podcast? Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I was fortunate enough to have him on early on when I first got going, and he gave me some great feedback. Number one, when we were talking, which was, just by me doing the podcast, I'm putting myself out there publicly and publicly trying to get better at something. And I know for a fact, if I go back and listen to episode 5 to episode 35, I know I'm way better than I was then. You know,
Right.
I critique myself. I listen to my episodes when I edit them. I put them out there. So the podcast I knew was just going to make me a better person. And then my wife told me it's made me a better listener. So that's been a great byproduct of it too. And it's been a wonderful experience that I have made. You know, financially, I've made a little bit of money just through some conversations I've had with people and some relationships I've made. But the goal wasn't to make money on it from day one. It was to be able to just build something and then eventually be able to transition into doing this or something of this nature full time. And being able to do it to where I look forward to doing it. I got to talk to people I've never talked to before. I probably wouldn't have had the chance to talk to before if I didn't have this podcast. That was really intriguing and enticing to me. But the biggest part of it was just getting to do this, have this conversation. My conversation with you is going to make me a better person. I know that. I'm going to gain from it. I'm going to glean knowledge. I'm going to gain insight from somebody I've never met before. So
Yeah.
And hopefully it helps somebody else too.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. That's so cool. And you answered a little bit. And the second one that I was curious about is, what are some of the things that you've learned from your guests that has made the biggest impact on you?
I think there's probably a few different things. One of them is they're like a lot of the. So if you look at a few of the, obviously because of my background and my wife's background, we have a big network of like strength coaches and trainers, right? But what's unique about it is like their eclectic backgrounds. And I've talked to probably about 10 or 12 different strength coaches, and each one came from like a different unique background and kind of how they transitioned and what they were doing. And what they're doing now is basically running their own business. They're an entrepreneur. They're successful, and learning about their backgrounds and kind of what they've taken from that and transition to what they're doing now has been really interesting to learn. I've talked to strength coaches that were architects, that were, were in the military, that were, one was was worked on a naval sub, people that were engineers, and then, somebody left a 6-figure job as an engineer. Bill Hannon, I had him on my podcast, and he started his own gym. So it's like, you talk about pursuing something you're leaving something that's safe, right? And what I mean by safe, as far as like, you're never going to want for a job like as an engineer, right? You're always going to get paid well. You're always going to have these projects. And then he went and started a gym, and that's like one of the riskiest things you could do. But that was something he was really passionate about. But he's successful in his training because he utilizes his knowledge from engineering, like the formula aspect of it, just like the understanding of concepts. And so like that's been really fun to listen and learn about. And I think the other thing that I've learned about is how many people are actually open to wanting to have a conversation. Because I thought it would be more like pulling teeth, talking to people and getting people to come on. I don't think I've had maybe 2 people say no, like to come on the podcast, especially now that I've got a few under my belt and there's enough videos out there that I put on there where people kind of see what the show is about. And it's not it's not a aha, I got you show. It's not a formulaic show. I mean, literally this is what I enjoy. Like if you were to like get to know me like I'm in real life, especially after the kids go to bed, my joy is sit around, have a beer, hang out with everybody, have a conversation, and just let the conversation flow. Like that's what I love doing. So hopefully that's kind of like what I, provide with this podcast. So
yeah, no, definitely. And that's one of the things that I like about it is that it's not structured. I mean, there's structure, but it's not structured. So it's really cool. So I appreciate you sharing that with me, because it's very interesting, the people that dive into this. And there's a great book called War of Art by Stephen Field. And he talks about how many people don't do things because of resistance that they put in their head.
Right.
About not wanting, they don't think that what they have is good enough for somebody else. And he uses an example. There was somebody who, I can't remember who it was, but painted all these paintings, but they hated them and nobody knew that they painted. So they kept them in a closet. And then when they died, when they went in to clean out their house, they found all these amazing paintings that now are super world famous and extremely expensive.
Right.
But that person limited themselves, and they put a resistance on themselves because they didn't think, well, nobody wants to see these. There's tons of artists out there that paint pictures. And that's where it's neat that you push through that. Like you saw it, but you push through that from a podcast perspective. You're like, well, who wants to listen to my podcast? There's a ton of podcasts out there. What did
Right.
they say? Like a million or
Yeah,
something?
like I think they just crossed like an actual a million registered podcasts,
Yeah. I
so
mean,
across all platforms.
it's a
Yeah.
ton. But what's really cool about what you said is the genuineness, and it comes across. So it's not fake by any means. That if you can just interact with one person to make yourself better, and if one person that hears that conversation's better,
hmm
then high five yourself in the mirror and you've done a good job. So that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Thank you. It's a lot of fun, and also, like I said, like some of the things I never even counted on it, improving in my life. It has like being a better listener, like being more intentional with my words. When I go back and listen to my first few episodes and I edit them, and I've said this before, I'm sitting there going, "Why did I say like 18 times in that like that 1 minute window?" You don't even notice you're saying it, or what was that weird hiccup, or what was that random. And it just makes you a better speaker, which is, I mean, obviously there's nothing wrong with being a better speaker, right? And a better communicator. And some of the good feedback, I always talk to my guests afterwards and I ask them to give me feedback, as far as like, hey, how'd you like the show? Do you have any feedback from me? I'm still trying to learn, especially if I'm talking to somebody who has a podcast or something where they are, they have something where they're on a public forum all the time, right? And I tell them to give me feedback. And Ryan actually gave me really good feedback. He said, "You know what, man?" He said, "I loved it. It was fun. It was really relaxing, great." He said, "My feedback for you would be just like where I was a few years ago." He said, "If you can kind of give yourself, don't script everything." He said, "Just give yourself a few notes so you can provide yourself a little bit more direction. That way you're not rambling too much in your questions and trying to say everything and ask a question at the same time. It'll provide more opportunity to deep dive in the conversation, because even though you want it to be flowing and you want to have an open conversation with somebody," he said, "it's still your show. You still want to be able to direct a little bit what you're trying to get out of the conversation itself in general. And you can go into the weeds. Sometimes it's fun, but sometimes it's just you're going off in the weeds and like nothing's really coming out of it and you're just rambling. So there's nothing good about just giving words just to speak, right?" So he told me, be a little bit more intentional with your questions in your direction of what you're doing. And after that, I noticed my next 3 podcasts were in, like far and away better because of that.
Yeah.
So I learned a lot from that.
Well, and that's even something as you were talking about it, I'm thinking, okay, I can apply that to just everyday conversations.
Right.
I mean, that's the beauty of that feedback is not only as it helps you as a podcast host, but by you sharing that with me, that makes me think differently, but not necessarily differently, but just reminds me of how important that is of not going into a conversation with something specific. I'm in sales, but having your outline, but not
Mm-hmm.
feeling like I've got to say everything that I want to say. And so therefore I'm not going to listen to what they're talking about. But if I can minimize my goals and plan what I want to do before I go into a situation, I'm going to be more effective. So that's awesome.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like I said, it's like, who doesn't want to be better at communicating, whether it's with your partner, or whether it's friends, or whether it's in a business environment, right? So, I mean, just having this, if I never published this show and I just record all these interviews and went back and listened to it, that alone would just still make me, better, right? But so that part of it's been great, and then some of the I guess some of the unintended consequences, like good, and that word consequences. People think it's a bad thing. It's not. It's just like what's come out of it has been some feedback I've gotten. Number one, relationships I've built with other people, which has been fantastic. And number two, it's that I have gotten some feedback through my social media page about inspiring people to do things like whether it was start a podcast or do something they're passionate about but they never did. I like I mentioned earlier, like after everything kind of shut down, and obviously having been in the fitness industry for 15 years, my wife and I were fortunate enough that a couple years back after we left our gym, we built our home gym, right? So we've got a fantastically outfitted garage gym, right? And we could take this and go open up a commercial like space if we wanted to, and so, but so many people, when everything shut down, everything started selling out, right? So many manufacturers and distributors are out of equipment, right? So I noticed somebody was one of the gym owners that we know down in California, Southern California. He started, just building these kind of fast do-it-yourself squat racks, basically just like a Home Depot bucket, a bag of cement, and then a 4x4, and then using some pipe fittings to make like the rack aspect of it. He's like, look, this isn't like a $400 rack, but you can build this for $50 and it gives you somewhere to put the bar, to be able to do squats and bench off of. And then, so I looked at that. I did a little bit more research, and then I ended up building my own squat rack for under $100. That was like, you could do pull-ups on like a legit squat rack out of wood and pipes. And I posted that, and I posted it in like that Order a Man Facebook group that I'm part of. And I posted online, I posted like, whatnot, and I sold it. So number one, I learned a new skill. Number two, I sold it. My wife loved it because her dad was in construction for 40 years. So she encouraged me to go buy more tools, right? That's an awesome wife right there.
Yeah, exactly.
And now I'm making dumbbells out of concrete and plastic. Yeah, man. So like I just finished my first set. I'm stoked, and I'm going to build another rack. So, and I've gotten feedback from people and pictures. They've been DMing me like, dude, you inspired me, and like pictures of their racks that they built, like, people like on the East Coast and down in Texas and stuff. So like, that's awesome, man. That's like, there's nothing bad about that. Right. So
no, that's the power of social media, right?
Yep.
Like we talked about, there's a dark side to it, of course.
Oh,
but
100%. Yeah.
If you filter out and you filter the good stuff, then the good stuff's going to come your way. I mean, the algorithm works for a reason. And if you're commenting, liking on things that are positive, that's all you're going to end up seeing. You might see certain things, but then you just get rid of it, you move on. So that's awesome, man. Yeah. It was fun watching you build the squat rack, and then, seeing your new adventure of building, plates and dumbbells and stuff. That's crazy. That's really cool.
And what's fun about that is like, nobody can sit there and say like, well, I can't afford that. I'm sitting there going like, you could buy an 80-pound bag of cement for $5, like, a 60-pound bag of gravel for $5, and those Home Depot buckets are like $3. You know what I mean? And then you can get like a 20 feet of 3/4 inch like electric conduit pipe for $10, right? So, and out of that, so you're talking about like a total of like maybe $20, and you can try and fail like numerous, and then you can buy your moldings, which is basically just like plastic Tupperwares and containers from the dollar store, right? So, you can. It's not an expensive thing, and if you screw up, big deal, throw it away and then try it again. And I got so much feedback from like old clients of mine that are in construction architecture, like, hey, if you do this, or you add this chicken wire to the plates, and it's like, so it's been fun kind of learning how to do it and figuring it out. So yeah, man, it's been a blast. Tell me kind of what your vision is with Active Futures. Kind of like, where do you see it going over the next couple of years?
Yeah, so over the next couple of years, I would love it to be the sole source of what I do, because I just love helping people so much. So it developing into, online platform, of course, but I love one-on-one coaching, training, doing very similar to what you and your wife do from the physical side, but from a professional development and personal development, not therapy by any means, but just helping people push themselves and unleashing the potential that they're holding themselves from. Because we all do it, right? We all have the same potential. We have all the same possibilities. We just hold ourselves back. So if I'm able to add value to people to eventually make that a full-time thing, that would be great. If not, I still have a great avenue that creates an opportunity for me to share things with people. I try to post tons of positive stuff on my Instagram and bring things out. One exciting thing that, again, knowing what I know is I hired a coach, and I hired a coach originally just trying to figure out how I could create a larger digital footprint so they're working for themselves on their own. And this gentleman's Adam Davis. And we first started talking about that information, but he's also an author. So after the first 2 coaching sessions around digital marketing, it flipped to where he had me write a book. And so I wrote a book, and our goal was June. I finished it. It's in the editing stage right now. So
awesome, man.
It's one of those things that that resistance, kind of like with your podcast thing. I was like, I'm never going to write a book. Nobody wants to read that. And then next thing I know is he broke it down in such a way that it was easy for me to understand. And so, I could write for 30 minutes a day at night. And next thing I know is I would sit down for 30 minutes. And the next thing I know, I've written, 1,500 words, and I've got a 27,000 word book that's being edited. And
what's it about?
It's about my 4 modules. So
Oh,
we're still trying to
fantastic.
figure out what the name's going to be, but it's
Uh-huh.
the modules, but it's based around a lot of the life stories that I've had and why each thing is important. And for me, I just try to, I try not to overcomplicate things in life.
Sure.
And I feel like that's been one of my gifts is somebody told me the other day is I'm good at distilling things down in a way that people can understand it. Cause
Yeah.
I'm not poetic. I'm not one of these guys that I just shoot people somewhat straight, but I try
Right.
to make things simple to understand. And so I'm super excited about it. And the biggest thing that excites me about it is my son often sits in that chair over there when he's on his iPad.
Uh-huh.
And so I told him, I was like, I finished. He's like, oh, Dad, that's awesome. And he goes, you know what, Dad? Even if nobody ever buys it, you can know that you finished it and feel good about it. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay, that's it.
That's pretty cool coming from your son.
oh, and he's 11. He
Yeah.
comes up with stuff like this all the time.
Yeah.
And it's unbelievable to be able to say that I finished it. It's I don't know what's going to happen to it after that, but it's just really neat to go through the process and feel good about getting it done.
Well, look, man, as soon as you start getting copies out there, or at least pre-order, man, put me down for one. I'd love to check it out and help promote it.
Yeah,
So,
I will,
yeah,
man. Appreciate it.
fantastic. Well, Jeff, man, thanks for coming on and joining me, man, and sharing your story, man. It's super interesting. Like I said, just reading a couple of little things about you, and then following you on Instagram and kind of getting to know you there a little bit. I was like, okay, cool. I'd love to have this guy on and talk to him. It'd be fun. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
no, I appreciate it. Yeah, I found you through Scott Flansbaum.
yeah, Scott's freaking awesome, man. I love
And,
Scott. He's such a good guy.
I stumbled upon him, and that's what's the beauty of Instagram. And then I know that we got to wrap it up, but that's what was
Yeah.
really cool is I first heard about you when he was on your podcast, and
Hmm.
so there's so many out there. So I was like, well, I love Scott's message and what he has to say.
Hmm.
So that led me to you. So I started listening to some of yours, and then I was excited when you followed me back, and then it's a neat how things develop and friendships foster even if they're virtually.
Exactly. Yeah, I've gotten to know so many people. I've talked, like I said, I would consider Scott a friend, and like we've even we're trying to set up where because he's in Arizona, we're in Washington, and we're just like, okay, as soon as this whole lockdown kind of, even though technically there's not like a travel ban, but just kind of how everybody's kind of weirded out by stuff, is as
Sure.
soon as things kind of lighten up a little bit, kind of syncing up and doing a getting together and getting the families together or whatnot. So it's like the relationships I'm building through this podcast has been amazing, and it's fun. It's really expanded my own world, instead of everything kind of being right here, because I was so focused on just my family, and then because I used to be friends with everybody, right? I mean, that's a whole other story. I could do a whole podcast on that, right? And that was that lack of like self-identity. So I would always adjust to the groups of people I hung out with, right? Kind of like a chameleon. I learned that in high school, and that just set me up for failure down the road. But then I went to the 180, like we always do, right? Which is like one thing we find out is bad, so we, instead of kind of taking a few lessons out of it, I did a hard shift, and then like I cut everybody out of my life, and then I just focused on work, family, and friends, and like my wife and my kids, and that was it. And then that's not fair to myself or them, because then I'm, even though like your family is your bedrock, it's still, you're putting everything on them. So there's no coaching. It's good to have a surrounding of like-minded individuals who push you, who you can talk to, who you can vent to a little bit. That's not always your wife, or not your 9-year-old, so, or your 11-year-old. So yeah. So for sure, man. Cool.
Cool.
Well, listen, man, thanks for coming on, and yeah, I can't wait to get your book, man, and check it out. I'm looking forward to that. Congrats on that, and your Active Futures project, man.
Thanks. I appreciate it, Alex.
All right, Jeff. Well, take care, man. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. All right.
All right. You as well.
Take care,
Thanks.
brother.